Ontario is the latest jurisdiction to enter the fray of the minimum wage debate. The province now ties Nunavut for offering the highest minimum wage in the country. And joining us to explore the benefits and fallout of this decision, Anil Verma. He's chair of Ontario's Minimum Wage Advisory Panel. Ted Mallett, Vice President, Chief Economist with the CFIB, the Canadian Federation of Independent Business, and Sheila Block, Director of Economic Analysis at the Wellesley Institute. We want to remind you that producer Hilary Clark and online producer Elamin Abdelmahmoud are hosting a Twitter chat right now. Do you think $11 is a fair minimum wage? Share your thoughts with us. If you would, use the hashtag AgendaTVO. Good to welcome you all here tonight to TVO. Let's just start. $11 an hour. Is that the right number?
Historically, it's high compared to the past 50 years, where we've seen it in today's spending power range anywhere between about $8 to $10 and change since really the early 1970s. So $11 is quite a hit to take. We've been there before. I mean, 2010, when it was set to $10.25, that's more or less where it's going to be reset at that time. But at the same time, we've seen a decline in the number of young people with jobs in the province. And we're concerned that keeping the rate at that level is going to create some other unintended consequences of keeping young people out of the job market.
Sheila?
I think it's really important when we think about this to really take a step back and think about what the Employment Standards Act's role is. And really, as Anil said in his report, it's to set a minimum floor and to really talk about kind of how we live together. And I think what was really helpful about the campaign for $14 an hour is it really said that if you're working full-time, full year in Ontario in 2014, you should be above the poverty line. You shouldn't be at the food bank at the end of the month. You should be able to pay both, your rent and your food. So I think that's really the context to think about the 11. It's a good start. It's a good starting point.
You chaired the panel, which actually did not make a recommendation on what the number ought to be. So we put that on the table with that admonition. But having said that, the government picked 11. What do you think of the number?
Well, the 11 number is basically a number that gives us the minimum wage that we had in 2010 in real terms. And if the government agrees to tie it to inflation, then what we would ensure is that going into the future, that the minimum wage will maintain its parity with inflation at the 2010 levels.
Okay, just explain to me how $11 today is the same thing as $10.25 4 years ago.
Because we've had the inflation has been about 7% and something, a little more than 7. So you go back to the 10.25 and you add 7.3% or whatever, and that gives you the $11. So very close to it.
So in effect, once you take inflation out of the mix, nothing's changed. Is that right?
So in real terms, yes, we are still at the same level that we were in 2010.
In which case was your campaign for not?
It wasn't my campaign, but I think what was really important.
What do you mean it wasn't your campaign? You're on side with the campaign.
Absolutely.
You agreed with the $14 an hour.
I thought it was a really important conversation to have.
Okay.
I thought it was a really important conversation to open up that debate, and to open up that debate really about decent work.
But the province has landed on a number now, which, when adjusted for inflation, is where we were 4 years ago.
So that's a disappointment. That's really a disappointment. And what would have been nice is if the government would have signaled not only did it want to maintain the real value of the minimum wage, but it did want to move that agenda forward. And it did that previously when it moved from $6.85 to $10.25. It did it in a series of steps and a series of stages that it signaled, which gave information both to employees and to the business community so that they could plan for it.
Well, Ted, let me ask you the flip side of that, which is if we really are today adjusted for inflation where we were back in 2010, nothing's changed for business, right? So presumably this will be reasonably easy to deal with?
From now on, and we don't have a problem with using CPI as a scaling indicator.
The inflation rate,
Consumer Price Index. It's well known. It's used in many other indexes and business practices. So certainty is actually a good thing. We're just wondering, is it right to have that particular level? Because there are trade-offs. Poverty is an important issue that we must deal with as a society, and it's an income issue at the end of the year, or at least it's the entire income for that time. But you're trying to deal with it on a per hour basis, and it doesn't work very well. And I think all the studies, or many studies, that seem to have difficulty connecting minimum wage policy with poverty. Can we solve it with that particular issue?
Hold off on that for a second. We will come back to this issue of whether the minimum wage and raising it actually does anything about the poverty rates. But before we get there, again, Anil, I need just some basic information here. Let's say you're currently making, because this doesn't go in until June 1st. So let's say you're currently making $10.75 an hour, which is 50 cents above the minimum wage in Ontario. When the new rate goes in June, do you continue to make 50 cents an hour above minimum wage, or will you just go to 11?
Well, that's up to the discretion of the employer. But what
we
find,
any law about that.
No, there's no law about that. But what we find in practice, if you look at previous increases in other jurisdictions, what people find is that if you're very close to the minimum wage, you do get a bump almost equal to the minimum wage. But as you move up and away from the minimum wage, let's say 20% above, the effect of that kick dissipates as we go higher. So between 0, if you're just above, and up to 20%, you can expect a little bit of a bump in declining order. But once you're above 20%, like if you're double the minimum wage, you cannot expect a bump from the minimum wage going up to 11.
Let's see if we can understand what we are already hearing, maybe some of the consequences of this. And again, Ted, to you first. The immediate reaction we heard from business was, yes, happy about the predictability going forward, but in the interim, we're going to hire less and we're going to give less work to the people who are currently on minimum wage because we can't afford to pay more. Is that really true?
That's a simple characterization. I think it's a lot more complex than that. A business owner has to spin about 8 or 9 plates. They've got their product line, they've got their prices that they charge for their products, they've got all their input costs, of which wages are one of them. So government has now said, okay, I'm replacing this plate with one that's heavier. The businesses have to react somehow, and they can react in many different ways, whether it's cutting back on hours, restructuring their business so that they don't rely as much on relatively low-income people in their workplace. They'd rather go with perhaps more highly trained people that can do more of the work without being affected by the 7.5%.
Let's say you're running a restaurant.
It's juggling.
If you're running a restaurant, chances of hiring another waiter or waitress at this point would be less because of the increase in minimum wage?
A lot depends on whether they're able to or not. If you keep cutting back on the hours that you're actually working, or that you have staff in the workplace, are you actually serving your customers as well? So they have, this again, they're spinning plates that they have to manage, and this is the complaint that you're hearing from businesses. They have to adjust somehow, and although perhaps we were telegraphed, this is going to happen, they still have to deal with it. They still have to deal with the employees who are earning $10.50, $10.75, and $10.95 per hour, who are now going to be saying, "Hey, wait a minute! I've had 2 years in this business, train. I'm more productive than someone who's now at the $10.25. Mm-hmm. Now you're all going to put me in the same category." So that's a discord that the employer now has to deal with in the workplace, and they never like that kind of.
And let's go to
we've
the
had
problem.
Increases in the past, not only Ontario but other provinces, other countries, and this is a very active area of research for economists, is to see what happens to employment, what happens to prices, and we looked at that research. And what that generally tells us, that if you make modest increases in minimum wages, that the overall employment effect is either small or negligible. But it is quite pronounced for young people, especially youth, who are about 60% of all minimum wage workers.
I want to make sure I understand this. You're saying that by increasing the minimum wage,
in modest amounts,
young people are less likely to be employed as a result.
They bear the brunt of the so-called disemployment effects.
Okay, then I need to ask Sheila, how does this make any sense then if part of what you want to do as a government is find jobs for kids?
So I think what's important is, as Anil said, and he did a really service to us in having that review of the literature, is that the evidence is really mixed on that. And
that's not what he said.
That's what his report
let me
said.
Correct. There are studies that find negative effects. There are studies that find no effects. But They're all over the map because other economic conditions are different. In fact, we were looking in the literature for what is the effect of minimum wage on employment given the state of the economy. So if your economy is growing, if you're in China, for example, where growth is 8, 9, 10%, if you increase the minimum wage by 5%,
not a problem.
Probably not much effect. Alberta has gone through that experience in the last 5 years. In Ontario, we had all these pre-scheduled increases between 2004 and 2010, and we had the financial crisis in 2008. And so at a time...
Well, that's the one I want to find. I want you to tell me, where's the study that says we're in the middle of the Great Recession? If we put the minimum wage up to $14 an hour, it's going to result in thousands of more jobs for teenagers. Did you find a study that said that?
No.
Okay. Is that a problem?
I think, I don't think that it's a problem. First of all, nobody was saying an immediate move to $14 an hour who was an economist. Second of all, there are mixed views about the impact of, you know, low-wage people spending in their own communities and increasing that kind of local demand. So I do think that we had talked about a phased approach, and I think, as Anil was saying, the research says there are a huge number of factors that affect the demand for labor, and a lot of them, you know, in an environment where the Canadian dollar is dropping as it is, which really increases the competitiveness of our exports. I'd like to see the study that says that and says what's the impact of an increase of a minimum wage on that. We know that minimum wage to a large extent is in the non-traded sector, right? So you can't say, oh, there are people you know, in other countries who are making $1 an hour and we're competing with them. We're absolutely not competing with them. And I think the key that Anil said is that in a phased increase, the evidence is mixed or slightly negative for teenagers. And I actually find that on the one hand, people are saying, well, we shouldn't increase the minimum wage because it's mostly teenagers who are working at the minimum wage. And
which is true.
Right. And then on the other hand, they say, oh, but we shouldn't increase the minimum wage because it could have a disemployment effect on teenagers. And I think one of the things that it's interesting to look at is to look at the issue of hours. Because you don't buy an employee, you buy hours. And so if a student works a few less hours and then has more time for their homework or doesn't come into class and fall asleep as a result, I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing.
I hear you, but everything I hear nowadays is politicians are looking for ways to create more jobs. And I'm trying to have anybody at this table point me to a study that says raising the minimum wage to $14 an hour will create more jobs.
Well, there are studies that say that. Those are their studies in the US that did a comparison of 2 states that were side by side, and one increased the minimum wage and one didn't. But I think what Anil's research said was that there was some limited applicability to the Canadian context, and so I think that's why the study said the research really is inconclusive.
But you know, going back to the number you pointed to, $11 an hour, this was a better year to increase the minimum wage in 2014, which I expect will be better than 2013 was.
Why is it a better year?
Well, because the U.S. economy is showing signs of life, and our dollar is dropping at the margin. So I think overall, the prognosis for Canadian economy is slightly better. I don't want to say how much better, but certainly it's slightly better. But you know, this is also an area where we need to do our own homework, which we haven't done in Ontario.
What does that mean?
Which means that we should have been monitoring from year to year what the effect of increasing the minimum wage has been on employment and prices. So for example, we have now said we'll increase it June 1. I would love to see a study with the CFIB and others where we go to all the restaurants in Toronto and we can take their prices as they stand now, both a few months before and a few months after. We look at their employment and payroll.
He's already said that, for example, restaurant owners, and I'm not talking about the waiters and waitresses, but the owners are juggling 9 plates at the same time. How would you know if an increase in prices was a result of an increase in the minimum wage, or an increase in the price of food, or an increase in the price of property taxes, or anything else for that matter?
If you measure immediately before and immediately after, you control for a lot of other things change over a longer span. So there is a methodology, and if we have large numbers, from that statistics we can tease out at least a sense of whether there was an inflationary impact on prices, or if restaurants stopped hiring certain groups of people.
Well, let me find. Do you have feedback from your members about that kind of a measurement that he just talked about?
Well, part of the problem is that we're already capturing this information from official stats. The CPI, or Consumer Price Index, is gathering that information. There are employment wage information collected by Statistics Canada, all sorts of things. Part of the problem is that instead of being an employer versus employee kind of issue, there are winners with a higher minimum wage. There are some employees who will receive a higher earnings, and if they're able to retain the same number of hours, or almost the same number of hours, at the end of the year they'll have more money. So they would be winners. The other group would not be winners. They'd be losers. The ones that perhaps can't find a job as a result, they can't break into the workforce, or perhaps they have a job at 20 or 30 hours per week and it's brought down to 15 hours a week. So they're the losers. How can...
What's the ratio?
We don't know. And that's, but we know that the net is negative on the teenager side, the people just trying to break into the workforce.
Which is most of the people on minimum wage.
Well, yes, that's the largest particular group. And it was very interesting to see Anil's study that showed that about 88.5% of the people earning minimum wages are not living in low-income households, which shows that...
Actually, it's 87.5.
87.5.
Sheila's number.
Just say it again. 87.5% of the people who make the minimum wage are...
not living in low-income households.
So they're living with their parents, basically.
It could be, or perhaps they're
or other members of the family who might have a higher wage.
Yeah.
So, but that's sort of getting at whether increasing the minimum wage will greatly influence poverty overall. And there we know that it's not a very sharp instrument to address poverty.
Okay, let me pick up on this, because I know last week in the New York Times, David Brooks wrote about this eloquently, and so did Andrew Coyne in the National Post just a few days ago, and I'd like to read an excerpt of what he had to say. Sheila's smiling already because she loves Andrew so much. Here's what he said, and then I'll give you the first kick at what he had to say. It has always been a valid critique of the market that it does not and cannot produce a fair distributional outcome. That does not change just because you tie a regulatory bow on it. Indeed, the minimum wage is particularly ineffective at fighting poverty, as much research has shown. Few people in poverty are employed at any wage, and for those that are, the issue is typically too few hours, not too low wages. If we really want to help the poor, here's a radical idea. Give them more money. Only do so directly, using the tax and transfer system, rather than fixing wages and hoping some of it reaches them. Your response?
Well, I think it's interesting that Andrew is such a proponent of government intervention at this point, because we know that to have those programs be really effective, they're very expensive. For example, I think a lot of people, I think maybe Anil has spoken about the working income tax benefit. The tax expenditure associated with it in 2012 was $1 billion.
What about guaranteed annual income?
That's even more expensive. And I think in an environment where there's such resistance to an increase in taxes and such at all levels of government, that really it's talking a little bit out of both sides of your mouth to be saying that we don't need to use a multiplicity of approaches here.
Could you speak to the first part of what he says, though, which is that if you really want to fight poverty, increasing the minimum wage doesn't do it?
I think what we really have to say is, are we interested in inequality, is one question. And the other question is, and absolutely, the minimum wage is a way to fight inequality. As we saw, it has a beneficial impact on the bottom 20%, as Anil just said. And it also does have an impact on poverty that doesn't cost an extra dime of government expenditures.
Costs him money.
Absolutely. So the other question is...
He's the guy who hires people.
Absolutely. It costs him money, and maybe he'll have to increase his prices, and maybe all of us will have to spend another dime or a nickel on a Big Mac. And then I think we have to, again, step back and say, is it worth it to me to spend another dime or a nickel on a Big Mac or at Walmart? Because we have said together as a society, people working full-time, full year, should not be living in poverty.
But I do think there is room for government to do more for the working poor. That is, people who are working but still are poor.
Related to the minimum wage or no?
Well, it sort of relates to the minimum wage in the sense that the threshold for tax-free income in Ontario is much lower than, let's say, in Alberta. Now, Alberta is also an outlier, but just for comparison's sake.
So raise that threshold.
Yeah, I think that in Ontario, if you make more than $10,000 or something, that you start paying taxes, whereas in Alberta, that doesn't happen until 17,000 or so. So, you know, another thing we could do for minimum wage earners is to say that, look, if you're given hours or wages or some combination of the two, and if you're still earning less than $15,000 a year, for example.
So raise the floor a lot,
yeah.
and that's
that would be a
good way to
direct
avoid
benefit
paying
to
taxes. You wanted to say about that?
So I think there are a couple of things about that, is that those taxes that are being paid provide really kind of essential services, and services that we know low-income people rely on more than higher-income people. So, you know, if you rely on the local recreation center for your kids, and you can't go off and buy private swimming lessons. So I think the idea of reducing taxes, in particular, reducing the threshold, which is a massive bleed for all people, right? So if everybody doesn't pay for the first $10,000 of income, that means I don't pay for it, Anil doesn't pay for it, the CEO of the Bank of Montreal doesn't pay on the first $10,000.
This is interesting. You're arguing against a tax break for the lowest income people right now.
I am arguing against a tax break, and what I'm saying is, in these times of scarce resources, what we really need to do is focus. It's more beneficial for low-income people to have those high-quality public services that they can't purchase privately.
Understand, but why don't you figure out some surtax for people making over X number of dollars, and that way you can have your cake and eat it too?
Well, in an ideal world, we would absolutely have a basic guaranteed annual income for everybody, and we would have high-income earners paying their fair share and all those kinds of things.
Okay.
But pragmatically, what can we get to?
Hang on, we haven't heard from Ted in a long time. Would you weigh in on whether or not
we
this...
certainly agree with what Andrew Coyne said. There's nothing more ineffective as trying to deal with something indirectly. To say that a working income tax benefit is too expensive because it costs billions, it's a direct benefit to the people who need it the most. That's what our recommendations are. We totally support those kinds of measures. Yes, we agree with the basic personal exemption would be too much of a wide shot to be able to deal with this. We don't want to give those kind of billions to the wide swath of society, but we're also saying that the minimum wage is an extremely inefficient way to deal with the issue, and we think that it is just saying that, oh, the business sector will pick up the costs. It's not really the business sector that picks up the cost. It's as it filters through the economy, people who pick up the cost are the ones that perhaps can't get themselves into the workforce as quickly as they can.
But speak to the second half of it. Hang on a second. Yeah. Sheila mentioned two things. Alleviating poverty, which seems to be some agreement here. This is not the finest instrument for alleviating poverty. But you also said it does a good job raising the minimum wage to reduce income inequality. Would you acknowledge that?
It doesn't. You can only deal with that on an hourly basis because you can't guarantee how much you get per week. You can't guarantee how much you get per year. So that there are elements, there are parts of the workforce that will see a lower income per year. And so you're trading one group of poverty for another. And that's really, by trying to simplify this issue so much, you've actually given a false sense of security to those who think they're being helped, when in fact they may well get hurt by this kind of policy.
Sheila, I need you to respond to this, because the suggestion here is that this plays well when appealing to the hearts of people, but that the actual intellectual rigor of the argument doesn't follow.
I think we have to rely on the evidence, right, which Anil canvassed. And when Anil canvassed that evidence, there is not a strong body of evidence that supports what Ted's saying. There is some evidence that there's an impact in Canada on teenagers. Those are the groups that we've kind of argued against, being in school. If we're talking about those people who are working, the 40% of minimum wage earners who are over the age of 25, or the 60% of minimum wage earners that are over the age of 20, we do not have a body of evidence that says there will be slower job growth as a result of their employment.
Okay.
An increase in the minimum wage, sorry.
I'd like, because you chaired the panel, I want to put the recommendations up and then have you speak to why you agreed on this particular recipe here. So, Sheldon, let's bring this up if we can. Here's what Neil's panel recommended. Revise the minimum wage annually in step with the Ontario Consumer Price Index. We've talked about that. Provide 4 months' notice of the change. Have a panel review the process every 5 years. And establish an ongoing research program to aid future minimum wage policy. And the government, of course, also announced that this first one, indexing minimum wage, they would put that forward as a new piece of legislation when the House returns later this month, and presumably the government's going to have to get either the Tories or the NDP to go along with it in order to pass the bill, because we're in a minority parliament. Why did you land on that particular basket in the recipe?
Well, you know, there were two perspectives that really guided us here. One was that we had complete unanimity among the panel members. So we had 2 members from business, we had 2 members from labor and community organizations, and we had a youth representative. And it's rare to get a group like that to agree on anything. But since we had consensus around these ideas, I thought this should form the core of our recommendations.
So they agreed on the indexing,
yeah,
the future increases.
Now, to my mind, what this does is first of all, it gets us out of where we've been recently. So if you recall, we've been through a period of freeze during the Harris years. Then we went through a number of years of pre-scheduled increases without any reference to what was happening in the economy. And then again, we had another period of freeze. What this would do is it would say to the working people that, look, you can expect a minimum wage which is in real terms the same as in 2010, and you would not lose ground relative to inflation. But this is only the first of such steps, and hence our recommendation that we review this process every 5 years. Now, we did talk about a couple of other bases for fixing the minimum wage, and one of them was the state of the economy. So if the Ontario economy is growing rapidly and it's healthy, then perhaps you can sustain more of an increase. If it's sluggish and in recession, then it should not be required to pay a higher wage. Well, hang on, that
requires a follow-up. What if we're in a recession and there's negative economic growth? Should companies be allowed to lower the minimum wage?
Well, we agreed within the panel that there'd be no clawback, in the sense that if there was deflation or slow growth, that you would not go back and say, give these people a wage cut. So
the floor is the floor.
Yeah, the floor is the status quo, but certainly there's an upside. But that, to my mind, would provide a mechanism where our minimum wages could grow in real terms. So, for example, the $14 an hour movement is really saying to us that, look, create a prosperous economy where we don't have menial, simple, low-skilled jobs, and everyone who works earns at a level where they can afford a good standard of life.
So this won't be an issue at all. Okay,
well, we are not there yet, but I think there is a path.
I got 2 minutes left here, so let me get these two on one thing. If you're not happy with, I know certainly you weren't happy with a $14 minimum wage, if you're really not all that thrilled with 11, where do you think it should be?
We've seen through history, the past 50 years, it's bounced anywhere between $8 and $10.50 per hour on that basis.
Assuming 2014 dollars.
Exactly. Okay. And so the question is, that becomes now the value judgment on what particular group should we be favoring, or should we try to split it down the middle. And so while we didn't agree with the moving it up by 7.5% to $11 an hour, I don't think there would have been too much concern. There would have been a lot less concern expressed if the decision was to start it at $10.25 per hour and then move it to the to CPI.
Let me follow up with this. If we put it at $5 an hour, would you guys go out and hire a lot more people tomorrow?
I don't think you'd have support in our community for $5 an hour. I think there is support for basic minimum wages. I think it's symbolically important, even if it has trouble dealing with the issue appropriately. And bluntly, it's still an important symbolic message. I'd love to get perspectives of business owners on whether it should be 8 or 9 or 10, but I don't think you'd find support for 6 or 7 or retrograde.
Let me give you the last 30 seconds on this.
So I think really What we've done is we've opened up a really important conversation in Ontario, and it's a conversation that takes into account the changes in the labor market, the fact that we now have an hourglass, and we really have to think about decent work and in decreasing inequality. And I absolutely think that the minimum wage is one piece of that conversation. And I just think it's great that it's receiving the attention that it is today.
You and the Premier love that word, conversation.
Conversation.
And I thank you for this one here tonight on TVO. Sheila Block from the Wellesley Institute, Ted Mallett from the CFIB, Anil Verma, who chaired that Ontario Minimum Wage Advisory Panel for the province of Ontario. He's also at the Rotman School of Management at the U of T. Thanks very much, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.